Good evening, everyone. I'm Charlie Keil, the principal of Innis College. Welcome to tonight's event with our very special guest, Linda Schuyler. I will begin by, I was going to say reading the land acknowledgement. I'm not sure if it's going to come up. If it doesn't, good, because I was going to do it from memory, and that is a test I didn't necessarily want to be proven to fail. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and to celebrate on this land. So it is my distinct pleasure to not only welcome you to, but to also moderate this event, which is celebrating somewhat belatedly, because the book has been out for a while, but The Mother of All Degrassi, a memoir by Linda Schuyler. And I thought, well, when was the first time I had to really reflect on Linda's accomplishments? And I thought, you know what? It was when Linda was given an honorary doctorate by the University of Toronto. And that was fairly early in my tenure as principal. And you may not know this, but as part of the nomination package, you have to provide a précis, a sort of distillation of what is to be said about the honoree, so that that can then be read at the ceremony. So I thought, what better way to introduce Linda than to read what I wrote for that occasion? Because the impressive nature of all of her accomplishments is going to be distilled into approximately 2 paragraphs. And this will give you a taste of what this person that we're going to be talking to and about tonight has accomplished. Linda Schuyler has been a leading force in the arena of Canadian television for more than 3 decades. Certainly more than 3 decades. Using her understanding of teenagers, gained from teaching grades 7 and 8, and her appreciation of the power of the moving image developed while a student at the University of Toronto, Ms. Schuyler has created one of the most successful and influential television franchises ever broadcast. Shown in 150 countries, the various iterations of Degrassi have informed young audiences on topical issues ranging from bullying to transgender identity. Ms. Schuyler's commitment to a combination of entertainment and compassionate social advocacy has earned her the respect of her peers and the devotion of a global audience. She has shared the knowledge and experience she has gained as an independent female producer in a male-dominated industry by supporting a wide range of organizations devoted to improving the working conditions of women in media. Her philanthropy is also extended to supporting media literacy, child welfare, and diversity in higher education. I should also say Innis College, too. I didn't say that at the ceremony. Her efforts in the public realm have been recognized by a Crystal Award from Women in Film and Television, an Arbor Award from the University of Toronto, and appointment to both the Order of Ontario and the Order of Canada. Her television programs have received multiple prestigious international television awards, including an International Emmy and a Peabody Award. In her home country, she has been the recipient of 22 Gemini Awards, in addition to that body's Academy Achievement Award. They're now known as the Canadian Screen Awards, in case you're wondering what Gemini refers to. For her indelible impact on generations of young people across the globe, Linda Schuyler has gained a well-deserved reputation as an iconic figure in Canadian television. And we could not be more proud to name her as an Innis alumna. And Linda will be joining me now on stage as we discuss her memoir. And just so that it can be clear, I'm the one who doesn't pay attention because they had nicely printed up the acknowledgement for me to read here. So I'm going to get flack for that. Might as well fess up right now. So, Linda, I want to start with what is probably quite an obvious question, but I think it's one that always wonders when a person of your stature, if they do, finally produces a book. Why a book at the time that you wrote this book? And can I just say, I'm sure one answer is, so don't give this one. I never had any time to write a book until the time I wrote this book.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, Charlie. And first of all, can I just say thank you so much for inviting me tonight. And it's always a treat to come to Innis College. And the last time I was here was in the summertime when we were breaking ground on the exciting new student, center, or what do you call it?
We call it the expansion of
Expansion.
the college, but
Okay.
it's student-centered.
Anyway, it was very exciting to be here for that and see that Innis College is alive and thriving and really well, so that's great. Why write a book? Well, first of all, you're quite right, Charlie. For the 40-odd years that I was producing the Degrassi series, it really was, when you are a producer, you really do run from one crisis to another. And it just sort of seems like you solve one fire and you're putting out your next fire. And when you're not, there's precious little time to recover. Plus, I didn't even think about writing a book, to tell you the truth. And it really took, it wasn't until I think we made the very difficult decision to sell our company, which included selling the IP, which would be Degrassi, and included selling our studio. I think in about 2014, and we kept working for another 3 years, and it was the same kind of pace as before. And then production stopped, and it really was the first chance I had to sort of take a breath in almost 40 years. And because when you're a television producer and you run your own company, there's a lot to be responsible for, both creatively, financially, corporately. And it was really when production stopped and the company was sold, and I took a breath, and I thought, what have I been doing these last 40 years? I mean, yes, I could look at the shows, and I was very proud of the shows, but it was, so I just started thinking about my life and what it had been. It wasn't really an intention to write a book, but it was sort of a moment to reflect and think about, when you've been so busy doing, have a moment to think, what is it that I have done? And that started leading to the process of writing a book, but it didn't happen really quickly. It really, in order for the book to get actually written, it took COVID. And it was when, in March 2020, my husband and I packed up our cats and we moved to our farm, which is out in Coburg, and it was quiet and peaceful and bucolic, and it was an ideal environment to write.
Was the process of writing idyllic?
No. It was really hard.
But you were saying it was bucolic.
And it's so funny because I'm used to being a producer, and I would meet with my writers weekly, and we would, at the beginning of each week, we would do a State of the Nation, where, because when you're in production on series, let's say we've got, 20 episodes going through that season, you've got 20 shows all in different stages of development. So some would be, very early on, some would be in the outline stage, some would be in the first draft stage. So we would go through the whole schedule and discuss where all the writers were and their various stuff. And then I would give them a game plan for the week, and my writers would go away, and they would come back with new stuff. And it was great.
So
it was
easy.
it was magic. It was magic. And so I would speak to my writers about, we need this, we need that, and there you know, next week it would be there. Well, when I sat down with my computer, and it was just me, it was really hard. It was really hard, and at first what I did was I would write maybe 2 paragraphs, maybe even a whole page, and then I would go back, and I would start editing it and working on it. And then I would determine that it was all drivel and it wasn't worth it anyway. And that was a very debilitating process, and I had to get over that one. So I had to learn to just keep writing forward, keep pushing forward, letting the sea of momentum pull me along, resist the urge to go back and edit along the way. And I learned a lot in the process, Charlie. I really did.
Yeah.
Self-discipline, one of them.
I would imagine you also developed a lot of empathy for the writers that you had imagined were magically producing these scripts.
Oh my gosh, the number of times I would compose, little emails in my head saying, I'm really sorry for that note I gave you about such and such or so and so. I never sent them, of course, but I tried to be empathetic with my writers. I tried to really meet them where they were at and encourage where I thought the script should go. But, I'm sure they have a different take on it.
Well, until they write their memoirs.
Right.
So one of the things that struck me when I read the book, and really it starts right from the beginning, is that this is not a straightforwardly chronological account of your career. I mean, it does follow, generally speaking, the chronology of your career. But there's a lot that isn't in here, and then there's things that one imagines are not going to be in here, and then they appear later than, and we'll go into more detail about what that entails in case you don't, are not familiar with the book already. But it starts here.
In Innis College.
That's right. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, how did you make the decision that that was what the starting point of the book should be?
Well, that's interesting because when I first started writing, I did write a little more chronologically. But what I also found was I couldn't keep to a chronological line because I would get caught up thematically. And when I would, for instance, one of the chapters that was very important to me was the one I call my queer education. When I talk about my great friendship with my friend Bruce Mackey, who actually we now call the grandfather of Degrassi because it was he who had a house on 98 Degrassi where we ended up shooting. And I couldn't talk about my friendship with Bruce and how important he was to me without talking about the fact it was in the 1980s and he was a gay teacher who could not be gay during the week. And so Bruce would spend his life being a straight teacher for 5 days of the week, and then for the weekend he was able to sort of pursue his gay lifestyle. And that was very upsetting for me, and it became very critical to me that the LGBTQ plus storylines became very important to Degrassi because of what I had lived through with Bruce. So when I was writing my chapter with Bruce, I was talking about our friendship. Then I would talk about, his queerness, and then that would lead me thematically to talk to the many iterations of queer storylines that we have told over the years on Degrassi. So that chapter kind of unlocked for me going ahead chronologically and allowing myself to spin forward in time thematically. And I think once I'd written that chapter, I gave myself permission to do that more often.
Right. So a key, I guess, biographical element, or for your purposes, autobiographical element, is something that you made the cornerstone of your address to students at the convocation where you received your honorary doctorate. And that is a horrific car crash that you endured very, young in your adult life. And I guess we could call it your adult life. And I'm wondering, and as I was reading the book, I thought, are we not going to hear about the crash? Like, where's the crash? And it took quite a long time. But when the crash does appear as a pivotal moment in your life, you understand exactly why you held off discussing it until the point it does appear in the book. It's one of the most effective, I think, moments in the book where you finally, it's not so much you tease it, but you do allude to it, but you don't give it its full coverage until the moment when it sort of reveals its significance to you in terms of your later adult life. So I wonder if you could just talk about that and your decision about the placement and its significance.
Well, to understand my car accident, I actually have to take you back to my grade 12 guidance counselor. And I was pulled into the guidance counselor's office the way we all were. And he said, Linda, we've looked at your aptitude test, and congratulations. We think that you would make an excellent nurse or an excellent teacher. Now, this is like the late 1960s, And the feminist movement was getting underway, and I thought to myself, well, yeah, but I don't want to be either of those things. First of all, I could never be a nurse because I can't stand sickness. I could be a teacher, I thought, but I expected more from myself. I wanted more. So rather than going straight to university, I took a gap year. And I went off and I traveled around the world. Well, I was supposed to travel around the world, and I didn't get any further than England. I was working, I had raised enough money, I was going to head to the continent the next week. I had met some friends. It's a long story, we don't go into all of it, but the upshot of it is, we were driving back very late at night. We stopped to get a coffee, we knew we were all tired, and we were climbing back into, it was one of these small British cars, and I had been in the passenger seat for the majority of the day. And when we were climbing back in, I realized the guy in the back seat had really long legs, and I said, I'm so sorry that you've been scrunched in the back of the car all this time. Would you trade places with me? You have the passenger seat, and I'll go in the back. And we started arguing. No, you're the guest of honor, you're at the front. The driver, who was tired, said, oh, bloody hell, mate, do as she says, get in the front, whatever. Well, who knows what kind of act of fate that was, I don't know. But it was about 20 minutes later that we had a head-on collision with a double-decker bus, and the two people in the front of the car died immediately. And I had extensive damage and wasn't able to travel anymore. And when I was able to travel, I came back home, and it was late August. And it was too late to get into any universities. And at that time, you could get into university if you had, we did grade 13 in those days, if you had grade 13. And so by default, I went to teachers college, which is so strange because I had no intention and no desire to go to teachers college. And it took an argument with a double-decker bus and to actually make me go to teachers college, which is, I'm grateful for that. But what was interesting about my experience with the car crash, I felt that the universe was telling me I shouldn't be an independent woman, I shouldn't have struck out on my own, I shouldn't have gone traveling. And it took me a while to shake that. And in fact, it took me, it was 9 years later that I would leave teaching and start my own business. But I really felt it was the universe telling me that I was a foolish girl to believe that I could be independent and that I could strike out on my own. And it was like I became a teacher by default. As it turns out, I was very good at it. And as it turned out, I actually really loved it. So that's a long-winded answer as to how the car crash. And as it turned out that are you talking about how the impact that it had on my life?
Yeah, because, let's hold that,
Okay.
because, yeah, there's a lot more to say about the way you articulate the crash's significance for you as a developing adult. And that it's really it was striking to me, knowing you as, my image of you is the confident, competent, ultra-successful producer of, a game-changing franchise. And yet, part of what comes out of the book is there was always this undercurrent of self-doubt. And so those two things, pardon the pun, collide, in effect. So I do want to come back to that. But I first, because you've touched on it now, is let's say, the primacy of education in your life. And how, I'd like you to frame for the audience how you see your leaving teaching, not really leaving teaching. If you agree with framing it that way.
Oh, absolutely. I taught for 4 years, and it was actually after teaching for 4 years that I came to Innis College. And I came to Innis College because we were moving to Toronto, and I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity to finish my degree, which I had been working on during the nights while I was teaching at Western. And I came to Innis because it was the only college that I could find at that time that offered anything in the way of film and cinema studies and women's studies. And it was one of the best things I did, because I got, like, nowadays there's so many courses you can get, but Innis was so special in those days because it was the only place I could find them. And so I finished my degree here at U of T, getting a grounding in the media. I did go back to school teaching, but I taught in I faced my first inner city class in Toronto. Now, I had grown up in Paris, Ontario, and Paris, Ontario is, the word diversity does not come to mind when you speak of small town Ontario. So when I stood in front of my class, my inner city class in Toronto, and I saw kids with all kinds of skin color. I saw kids many of them, their first language was not English. They went home and they spoke a different language at home. They had a different cultural background at home. And I looked at these kids and I thought, wow, they're traversing this very difficult time of life when they're kids becoming adults, those teenage years, and they're also dealing with a different cultural experience when they go home at night. And it really made me wonder, how do these kids cope? And I started talking to my kids more about it. And with my kids and with help from my principal, I actually made my first documentary, which was called Between Two Worlds. And it really was a celebration of diversity and a celebration of these beautiful teenagers that I was teaching. And I think those two things together made me realize, wow, the power of the media, because the documentary that we made ended up selling across Canada at a time when we were exploring multiculturalism under the then listen to me, Prime Minister Trudeau. And I thought, our film that we produced with my kids in Toronto was now being used right across Canada, and it was stimulating discussion on multiculturalism and diversity, although we didn't use that word in those days. And I thought, wow, the classroom can be bigger than just my 30 kids. There is an opportunity to reach more kids. And so for the next 2 or 3 years as I was teaching, I kept asking the Board of Education are there more materials that you have and I can use in my classroom with my adolescents? And we couldn't really find anything. So it was really about my 8th year of teaching where I said, you know what, I'm going to leave teaching and I'm going to start my own company and I'm going to produce shows for and about young people. I wish it was all that easy. There's stories behind all that, but eventually I was able to. But I always saw my filmmaking as an extension of my classroom. And I think it's interesting because people often ask me, why has Degrassi had such longevity? And I think because there's a mandate behind Degrassi that is different than other teenage shows. And I'm not suggesting that we're right and they're wrong. I'm just saying we had a mandate. And my mandate with Degrassi was to engage, and you engage with good storytelling and good characters and whatnot, but to educate and then empower. And it was my hope that ultimately when young people watched an episode of Degrassi, they would be given permission to make their own choices, feel empowered to make their own choices. And that to me was a really critical part of the whole Degrassi experience. We weren't just creating a TV show to engage and get ratings. There was another agenda with it.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it from that documentary where you had a final interview with the student named Donald, or was that the next one?
No, that was it.
That was it.
That was
so
it.
I'd like you to talk about that episode, because I feel like that taught you a lot about a number of things, power of editing,
Yes.
but also what happens to product that gets sort of taken away from your control. And so if you would elaborate on what I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, when I was doing my documentary, I had these two great students who had just come from Jamaica. And they were twin boys. And we did a lot of fun stuff in the documentary. I talked to them about serious stuff, but we did some fun stuff. And I took my class on a skiing trip, and Donald and Ronald saw snow for the first time. And so I've got lovely shots in the documentary of them falling over in the snow and laughing and giggling. So I did an interview with one of them, and I, was asking Donald what it was like moving to Canada, and he said, "Oh, it's great. My parents both have jobs. We're really happy here." And I said, "Well, have you experienced any difficulties?" And I actually didn't expect much from the answer there, because he looked so well adjusted, and we had so much fun together. And he said, "Well, I had a bad time the other day when I went to the diner for a hamburger." I said, "Oh yeah, what happened?" And he said, "Well, I opened the door and the wind blew it, and these kids looked at me and they said, 'You,' and they used the N-word, 'shut the door.'" And he said, "I hadn't been spoken to like that before." So I said, "Well, Donald, how did that make you feel?" And his response was, "I felt so stupid I wanted to be white." And I looked at this beautiful kid, and I thought, that is so not what you should be feeling right now. You should be proud of who you are. You should be owning who you are. But nonetheless, that was his thought in the moment, and I had it captured on film. So when I was looking through the footage and I was editing it, there was part of me that said, is that moment too intimate? Do I have the right to even use that statement of his? Then there was part of me that said, no, that's a very powerful statement. I should use it. And I was going to use it in the middle of the show, and then I was going to end the show on a very happy note with everybody skiing and going to dancing, a nice montage. And then the other thought I had was, do I keep that, and do I make it the very last thing in the film? So those are three incredibly different alternatives, and the film would have turned out very differently where I placed that interview. And in discussion with my editor, Clark Mackey, who's gone on to run the film program at Queen's University, we said, let's try it at the end. So we tried it at the end, and I actually took it back and I showed it to my class and asked them what they thought about it. And they were a little mixed about it, but in the end, they said they thought that that's where it should be. And we talked about it because we hoped that other people would listen to what Donald said, and that they would start their discussions about why does that boy feel that way, and what can we do to prevent that. So we left it that way, and it was I think it was the right decision at the time, and I think that's what made it very powerful in terms of why it got distribution right across Canada. They wrote teachers' guides to go with it and whatnot. But then, probably you want me to tell the other piece, right?
The PS, yeah.
So I got called down to the principal's office one day, and it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for years or whatever. You get a call to the principal's office. Yeah, it's scary. It's like, oh my God, is my register up to date? Is my plan all good and whatnot? So I go down to the principal's office. Yes, Linda Schuyler here, and he said, "Linda, close the door." He said, "I got some good news for you." I said, "Oh, yeah?" He said, "NBC want to run your movie." And it's like, holy, NBC? My movie? That's pretty awesome. Well, turned out they didn't really want to run the movie. They wanted to run a little bit of it. Well, nonetheless, this sounded like great, and what first-time filmmaker doesn't want to know that NBC is going to air your footage? So we all gathered the night that it was going to be on air. And we were very excited. And it was like a 60 Minutes type show. I can't remember what it was actually called. And they had been running a lot of really hard-hitting difficult racial tensions from the States. And they said, and now coming up after the break, we move to Canada. There is a time bomb ticking in Canada. And I thought, what are they talking about? So we sit through the commercials, and then bits and pieces of my film came on, and they had taken out all the joy, all the fun. We didn't see the guys having fun in the snow. We didn't see the kids interracially dancing together. We saw a couple of the interviews, and we saw the Donald interview. Completely out of context. It looked sensational. It looked exploitative. And I was furious. And there was nothing I could do about it. Because the show belonged to the Toronto Board of Education. The releases, the paperwork was all in place. And, you know, of course, me, I'm in my 20s, and I'm like, well, I'm going to sue. I'm going to, like, well, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. But I learned so much about editing and context through not only what I went through with my own experience, having carefully thought out where I thought the interview would best sit, and then see it put in an exploitative manner with no context. And that, Charlie, that was a university education in and of itself.
So, I mean, that could have happened, I suppose, with any broadcaster that might have taken it. You know, it could have been used for those purposes. But the fact that it was an American broadcaster of significant reach and clout, can you say a bit about how you negotiated the fact that eventually Degrassi would become an international phenomenon, not restricted to Canadian screens or Canadian outlets, and also the way in which you, maybe a few examples of how you kind of butted heads with what often turned out to be American notions of what your show should be, as opposed to what you knew your show had to be.
Well, I think that's the hardest thing a producer has to do, is keep the vision and the truth and the authenticity of your show. At the same time, we need our broadcasters to finance our show, to air our shows. So it's always a very delicate tightrope that you walk, trying to keep your broadcaster happy, but at the same time, keeping your vision intact. I've had 2 major American partners. Well, I guess I've had 3 major American partners now. No, 4. But anyway.
A fair number.
A fair number. When I did my earlier series, The Kids of Degrassi Street, we were able to finance that completely with CBC. So it was, you know, with some distribution advances and some grants and a bit of investment here and there, we were able to do it with one broadcaster. But when we came up with Degrassi Junior High, it was a bigger production, and we would need more than just CBC. So as luck would have it, we won a Prix Jeunesse in Munich, and a Prix Jeunesse is like the Emmy of children's television. And somebody from PBS was there, and they met the woman who was at CBC, and they said, we really want to work with Linda and her team. And they, the CBC person knew that we were developing Degrassi Junior High. So she brokered the deal where we all got together, and it took a while, but we were actually able to, well, we weren't actually able to right away. No, I'm remembering what happened. That's right. So for me to produce a show about youth empowerment, it was really important that the kids made decisions, and the kids, it was all, I didn't care what the adults were thinking. I really wanted to follow what the kids were thinking. So all my scripts were written from the kids' point of view. And we were developing it, and CBC and PBS seemed really happy with it. We were still on the legal end, trying to sort out the deal, and we only had a few more bits and pieces to do. We were very close to going down to Washington, to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, who were going to come in with a big chunk of money. And my partner from PBS said, before we take it down to Washington, I just wondered if we could make a little tweak to the show. I said, oh, okay, what would you like? Well, she said, you know, we're doing these serious issues with kids, and I'm thinking we need to do something a little lighter. I'm wondering, perchance, if we could have like a lady, a wise lady who lived at the end of the street. And I think it might be a good idea if she had lots of cats, because kids like cats, and we could have this cat lady. And so if we've been talking about teen pregnancy, or if we've been talking about sexuality, could we then go and talk to the cat lady about it? And it was like, what planet is she on? Like, she knew I wanted to do a show about youth empowerment. Well, cat ladies don't empower youth. So we ended up having this incredible disagreement. And I just said to, who's now my husband, my lawyer at the time, I can't go through with this deal. And so he's very calming, and he got me to calm down. We ended up, so we didn't go to Washington. It was like the deal was done. Then, as luck would have it, a couple of months later, we won an Emmy for one of the Kids of Degrassi Street that we had done. So we go down to New York, and we're nominated, and we go down, and we win, which of course is highly exciting. And we're partying and drinking lots of champagne, and this very well-dressed man came up to me and he said, Linda, I understand we're going to be doing business together. And he said, I'm the president of WGBH Boston. And I said to him, oh, no, we're not, because you want a cat lady. And it was like, when I got back to Toronto, I was so embarrassed with myself. Like, I mean, seriously, I said that to the guy, the president from WGBH Boston. Well, funnily enough, that afternoon, in those days, we did business by fax. Our fax machine started running, and it started spitting out a contract. And it was a contract from WGBH Boston to buy Degrassi Junior High. And there was nothing in it about the cat lady. And so I sent it to my lawyer, and I said, this is a contract. They want the show. So Stephen said, we're getting on a plane. We're flying down to WGBH Boston right away, and we're going to make this deal happen. And I said, but what about the cat lady? He said, don't mention the cat lady. And we ended up doing a deal. We did not have to have a cat lady, but trust me, it was tense there for a while.
I knew we had to talk about the cat lady. I want to read you, assuming I've kept the page correctly. I want to read about another stage in your career, let's say, when it seemed like American involvement would be exactly what you wanted, or would move your career to the next stage, let's say. So this is when you went to LA and met with various agents.
Right.
And so CAA, for those who don't know, is one of the most important and influential agencies in the US. And so you met with a man named David Tenzer, who was at the time head of CAA, and you said, this is what I want to read. Over time, David and I would discuss various projects and options. He was always willing to give advice on matters large and small, and became a friend. In the end, there would neither be a move to the States nor a major US network deal. But what I got from those meetings was something far more valuable. I got validation, many times over, that I was a real producer. Nobody had referred to me as a recycled school teacher, as an unwanted immigrant, or as a useless and manipulative partner. I was a producer in my own right. Can you unpack that paragraph a bit for us? Because this then, I think, brings us back to the crash.
Well, I don't know if any of you have had the experience of changing careers, but it's hard to leave your old career behind, particularly when I had been teaching and I left it to go out on my own and be an independent producer. And there is so much opportunity for self-doubt. And even when I won that first Emmy, I remember having a dream when we got back home, and I dreamt that this huge hand sort of punched through my living room and grabbed the Emmy and took it away. And I was sitting on the couch watching this, and I didn't fight because I thought, no, that's right. I really don't deserve that Emmy. Because I still thought of myself as a recycled school teacher. And I was I was having a pretty good run, but I wasn't really a producer. And I think all of us who, particularly if you're running your own business, but not only that, I mean, I hear it with sports players all the time as well, that you're aware of your roots. I'm very aware that I'm a British immigrant, that I grew up in a small town in southern Ontario, that I didn't have any examples as a woman of other people running their own businesses. When I joined the Canadian Film and Television Producers Association, I was the only woman at the table. I became the first female chair of the association, but even then, I would still have self-doubts. And it's incredible, and I know, Charlie, you say it. You look at my list of accomplishments and you think, well, seriously, Linda, get over yourself. But it's a thing.
Yeah, and I guess what people might not realize when they look at the book, they might think, this is how I kind of read it, is initially I thought, oh, the mother of all Degrassi, so it's really going to be about all the successes that Linda encountered by, pushing through these different iterations of Degrassi. But ultimately, it's as much about your empowerment of yourself as it is your empowerment of teenage viewers through this show. And I know I'm making, I keep returning to the crash, but I think that is in part because it has such a pivotal role in the structure of the book. And what you indicate you learned from that is that you had been denying yourself the ability to see yourself as someone successful, in part rooted back to that experience. And it took a long time for you to work through what you called, laying claim to your own resilience. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is, it's apart from having a lot of self-doubts, it's really hard to shake being a survivor when you know that 20 minutes before you had a car accident, you were the one sitting in the seat that could have taken your life. And I think that's been baggage that has been mine since the car crash. And then on a physical level, the car crash left me unable to have children. And so it's very interesting that I think the hardest piece of my book I had to write was the title, because I hadn't called it The Mother of All Degrassi. It had umpteen titles. I can't remember which was the last one it went out with. But one of my longtime partners, Jan Moore, he said to me, Linda, I don't like any of your titles. I think you have to call yourself The Mother of All Degrassi, because that's what you are. And I had always wanted to be somebody's biological mother, so it was a very difficult word for me to own. And he and I had quite a discussion about this, and I talked it over with my publisher as well, who also really liked the title. And it's taken me a while to know that I can own that title of mother without ever having actually been a physical mother, and that I have been a nurturer of so many young people over the years. But it was a residual thing from that crash. And it's so funny, I look back at the crash, funny is not really the right word, but I look back at the crash and it left me with survivor guilt, it left me infertile, but it led me to teachers college. And if I hadn't gone to teachers college, would I have ever done Degrassi? So I'm sure this is one of the reasons why I think every one of you sitting here right now need to go home and start writing your own memoir, because when you write your own memoir, you have an opportunity to get to know yourself and to join the dots of some of these bits and pieces.
Well, I just realized, I just glanced at my watch ever so subtly and noticed that we've been talking for longer than we were supposed to.
Oh.
But you've been so engaging that I didn't want to stop. But I am duty-bound to hand this, not this microphone, but a microphone, over to the audience so that they can play me. So if you have questions for Linda, if you could put your hand up. We have a couple of runners, and now you're going to get other questions. Yeah, right here. I'll designate. I'll have the power of the finger.
Hi. Oh, it's kind of loud. Hi, sorry, my name is Mia. Nice to meet you. So this is a very big and broad question, but I would like to become a director and screenwriter, maybe producer myself also one day. So I'm just curious to know, what is your advice for someone who would like to be a filmmaker, or what you think is the most important thing that an aspiring filmmaker should know?
Well, Mia, what stories do you want to tell?
Well, I am really interested into science fiction, fantasy, but also like action, adventure, like more like fiction type of stuff.
Right, so that's a genre that you're interested in. So I think what you have to do is really ask yourself, what stories do you want to tell in that genre, and why? Because you need to find, I'll have to tell you, I kept a series of binders behind my desk, and I called them Why I Do What I Do. And they were letters from kids that had written into me, and emails. And this wasn't press, this was from actual audiences writing to me about how my show had made a difference in their lives. And when times got really rough and I was having trouble getting bank financing or things weren't going my way, I would go and I would read those books, and I would be reminded of my passion. I was reminded of why I wanted to tell those stories. So, you know, there's a craft to filmmaking, but there's also passion, and you have to sort of find where that sits for you, and then pursue it, whether you do it through what you write, or whether you find like-minded people and you're able to do something, you know, with them. But you've got to take a hard look at yourself and to say, why do I want to be a filmmaker? Why do I want to tell these stories? And you've got to be honest with yourself and try and find an answer to that.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I would say in the book, it's pretty clear that you have this North Star of never deviating from that, being true to your own vision of what you wanted to be telling, not only in terms of the telling about, but who you were talking to.
Yeah.
And that's so clear that you remain committed to that throughout, which is probably why Degrassi was successful
Well, it does
for so
keep
long.
you going through tough times.
Yeah.
It does, for sure.
Now, I had seen, I think, another. So I'm going to pick, I think, was one of your biggest fans, that woman with the jacket there, right?
Your
With
predecessor.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Linda, I'm so happy that you're here. I'd like to tell everybody Linda's name is up there, not just because we love her, because she contributed to this wonderful town hall, as she has contributed to the expansion. I could go on thanking you, really. Thanking you for caring about Innis College, thanking you for contributing to culture, and to culture of teenagers, adolescents, etc. I mean, as Charlie said, you really have had a remarkable and innovative, I would say, career. So, Linda, dear, here comes the question. Especially initially, because you are bold, because you are brave, did some of the themes that you had in Degrassi and the enactment of the themes, did they produce criticism, resistance, and if so, how did you deal with it?
You're talking about like some of the subject matter that
Absolutely.
we might have taken on?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I like to think of Degrassi as a Trojan horse, and we begin each series and we begin each new season with great joy and great anticipation that we're going to have a great year ahead of us at Degrassi. And for the first two or three episodes, we don't do anything too terribly bold because we're engaging and we have fun stories. But really what I'm doing is I'm really building up to get the audience to enjoy my characters, to like them, to feel they want to go to bat for my characters. And then we will, and also I'm building up my confidence with my broadcasters as well, to know that we have the kind of storytelling that is not salacious. We're not trying to be sensational. We're not trying to be trivial. We're genuinely trying to find that lane in between, which is a good place to speak to young people. So once you get, I remember in the very first year of Degrassi Junior High, the most important story for me to tell in that first season was Spike getting pregnant. Now, we're talking the 1980s, and we're talking, if Spike was going to get pregnant, we're talking about a 15-year-old girl having had sex. Well, people weren't talking about that on television in those days. And I, for many reasons, I was very determined that we were going to tell that story. But we held that story off till episode 10, so that we had a lot of buy-in with our characters. We were building loyalty. And even then, I was still working with the same partner, PBS, and even though they had approved the script, they started getting cold feet about, really, can we really put it on public television that a 15-year-old had had sex? And we actually, for that show, had to film 2 endings for it. One, neither addressed the problem she'd had sex or not, but one of them was she was going to be pregnant, and the other one she was not going to be pregnant. Because in those days, you had to go down to a clinic to get tested. You couldn't just go to Shoppers Drug Mart and buy a test. So we shot both of the endings, and we had quite a lot of discussion with both of our broadcasters. Canadians bought into it much quicker than the Americans did. Eventually, we got buy-in, but it was not after a lot of discussion. I would say the other episode, the other topic that has given us repeated pushback, particularly from the States, has been the 3 times we've told an abortion story. Mm-hmm. And again, like Canadians, it doesn't matter if we're voting liberal or conservative, but we just are a small liberal, there's just a small liberal tendency that we have that is not there in the States. And I got pushback every time I told an abortion story. One of them I had to recut, particularly for PBS. And the other pushback I got, again from the States, was when the very first time that we showed an interracial couple dating. We had a black guy dating a white girl, and I got some of the most horrible hate mail from the southern states. It was incredible. But but on the other hand, I got those beautiful binders that I told you about that are behind my desk, and why I do what I do, and they far outweigh any of the hate mail we might have got or any of the broadcaster pushback. And it's really what I had to learn as a producer is what hills to die on. You know, there would be sometimes you would get producer pushback, and it was like, okay. I remember once we were doing a story, there was some violence going on, and somebody was going to have a gun, and they were nervous about a gun, and so we made it a knife, and my writers were incensed. They said, no, this story has to have a gun. And I said, no, guys, the story's going to be the same story if we tell it with a gun or with a knife. I don't even remember the details, but that was not a moment to push back. We let the broadcaster have that. But then you reach your other moments, and then you stand firm and you push back.
Well, you persevered, didn't you, Linda? Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, next, right at the front here, Raven, if you don't mind. Right at the front.
Hello, my name is Ava. I am an actress and aspiring filmmaker, and it's no secret that the entertainment industry is extremely competitive, and as mentioned earlier, it is a male-dominated industry. So my question to you is, in times of discouragement, how did you stay motivated to accomplishing your goals?
It's a little fanfare.
Well, it's not easy, and you've heard me talk about having self-doubt and feeling like an imposter, and it goes back to that passion. And I consider at the end of the day, I am so fortunate to have had almost 40 years where I've run my own business and told the stories that I wanted to tell. And it hasn't always been clear sailing, but I wouldn't have changed it for the world. But there has to be, it's funny, when I was doing auditions, I would always ask the kids when they were auditioning, because so many of the kids that we auditioned had never worked before, like they didn't have resumes, and that was fine with me, I didn't mind that. But I would always ask them why they wanted to be an actor. And sometimes they would say, my mom thinks it's a great idea. And it's like, okay, I know who's not getting this job. But the ones who've said, my parents always tell me that I've entertained them, or I want to be an entertainer, the ones who really knew what they wanted to do, those were the people that would kind of stick it out when times get tough. So again, it's a similar answer to what I gave to Mia over here. You kind of got to know why you want to do it. Because then if you know why you want to be an actor and why you want to be a filmmaker, that's going to give you what you need to push through when you start doubting yourself.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Raven, I'm sorry you're still on. It's behind there.
Hi there. Thanks for all the work that you've been doing. I wanted to follow up about the reboot for Degrassi. I saw that, because I do work in the industry behind the scenes, that you guys were going to do a reboot, but unfortunately, due to the strikes, there was a cancellation. So are you still working on that behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, I am not working on it. As I told you earlier on, we sold the company and sold Degrassi, which was a very, very tough decision for me to make, and that's another topic of conversation. There was an announcement in January of this year that WildBrain, which was the company that bought us, had made a deal with Degrassi to be the reboot with HBO Max. And they were hoping that it was going to, they had quite an aggressive timeline. It was a great deal. It was a multi-million-dollar deal. They had a writer's room going. It was all looking very positive. I mean, the fact that they issued a press release means it was all good. Then things happened that you cannot predict in our industry, and HBO Max was bought by Discovery Channel. And Discovery Channel shut down all the live action for young people. And so it's like, our industry can be very wonderful, but it can be very fickle. And just with the stroke of a deal with Discovery and HBO Max, Degrassi was hit in the crossfire there. They are also still trying to do a reboot, but now, of course, we're just coming out of one of the strikes. We're not out of the other strike yet. So the strikes have had a very negative effect on both production and development in terms of what people are picking up. And also the industry is in flux right now because the streamers are looking at, is streaming still working? There's a sense that some people are saying we need to go back to some sort of appointment television. It is in flux. And I know that WildBrain is very much committed to bringing back a reboot of Degrassi, but the times are challenging.
Just so people realize the scuttlebutt is that when production returns to streamers, they'll probably reduce by as much as 20 to 30%. So the so-called era of peak TV is over. As far as the streamers are concerned, they're no longer going to have just this surfeit of programming. And that means, like you say, some ideas are just going to be casualties of that programming decision. But I just wanted to ask you a question about that. How would you feel about a reboot that you had no involvement in? Like, how will you respond to that? Like, or you could just say, well, if it's good, I'll be fine with it. If it's bad, I'll say not my. But I just wonder how you feel like your legacy will be affected by the fact that there will be, if there are, iterations of Degrassi that postdate your involvement in the franchise.
Well, I think there's a nice way of looking at it, and there's a cynical way of looking at it. I guess my feeling is that if Degrassi goes forward with a reboot and it's successful, then I have nothing but pride, right? I'll be thrilled that the show has got the stamina and the legs to stand on its own. And if it goes forward and it's not successful, I wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, there's a lot of questions. Yeah, I know you're very insistent, so we'll go with you. Yeah, they're right there.
It's a simple question. But Linda, how would you feel about your life story being told as a documentary?
Well, funny you should ask that.
Was not a plant.
Wild Brain have just told me that they are going to be doing, not necessarily my life story, but they are going to be doing a documentary, a 3-hour documentary on Degrassi, which they hope to also cut as a feature-length documentary. And just so as you know, a writer has picked up the film rights to my memoir and is working on a dramatic story of my life.
And it is dramatic.
So who's going to play you?
I don't know, Emma Stone.
I know there were other hands. So maybe right here in the, I'm trying not to color identify people's clothing in case I'm way off. Greenish.
Hi, I'm Anne, longtime TV enjoyer and film student. I'm just wondering, and it might be a storyline you've already touched on, but in all these iterations of Degrassi and all like the wonderful, important stories that you've told, do you have a favorite or one that you're proudest of that stands out to you in particular?
It's like, I am a mother of 525 children, right?
Well, like, think about it. I don't know.
I think I'm going to mention one, not because I don't want to speak badly of the other ones, but I'm going to mention one simply because of what the times are right now. And that was in 2010, which would have been 13 years ago. Degrassi came out with a story on a transgender character. And this was a year or two before Orange is the New Black came out, where they were given a lot of credit for having a scripted transgender character. And we did it the way I was talking about earlier. We got to know our character Adam as Adam. And it was only, and he was one of the guys and whatnot, and it was only when we got to episode, whatever it was, doesn't matter, that we wrote a storyline when we were at breakfast that morning, and Adam's mother says to Adam, "Oh, Gracie, would you please wear a dress today because your grandma's coming?" And that's the first glimpse that we get, is that, oh, Adam is trans. And I say that because I'm just looking at all the pushback that is happening right now. And I'm so proud of our show that we were able to be there in 2010. And if we were doing a reboot, I would hope that we would own that space exactly the same way. So that's your answer.
Thank you.
So I know there was, do you still have a question? We have to wait for the mic. Oh, right here, sorry. There was a, I can't tell whether the sigh is directed to, right here in the brown. I am going to use colors, that's the best.
Sorry, I was just going to make a quip when you were talking about either way you win. If the reboot is successful or not, I would be like, do you have to change that to the mother of most Degrassi?
Well, the way I look at it is probably by that time I will be the grandmother of Degrassi. So.
And maybe Julia Roberts.
Okay. The trouble is, it's going to go over the years. Well, anyway, that's hair and makeup can deal with that. I don't have to worry about that.
We can do the whole thing with multiple actors playing.
That's right, like the crown, yes.
I think we have time for maybe, one or two more. Sheila, does that seem okay? Yeah, okay.
Hi. I just want to follow up on specifically you're talking about the transgender storyline, and my partner and I have been rewatching Degrassi recently. And what struck me a lot is how many of these stories from, 20, 30 years ago are things that it seems have only become well known in the public eye recently. Conversations around bisexuality in the early 2000s would not have been very well known. And so I'm just wondering, where did you learn these things? Like, where did you get the stories from? Were there people
Linda.
that you were talking to?
What blocks were you going around?
Well, it's interesting because when we started with Degrassi Junior High, there was precious little sex education in the schools. And in those days, we were talking to Generation X in those days, and there was no internet either. And so these kids really didn't have anywhere to turn to get their information. And so it was part of the Degrassi mandate to have sex education as part of, and I don't know if you know or not, but Sue Johansson, who recently died, she actually was part of our show as Dr. Sally, and she would answer sex questions for the kids. So it was an important, and sex education is not just about the birds and the bees. Sex education is about dating protocol, how you hook up, how you break up, gender identity, sexual identity, and a lot of that was not discussed in the schools. So you asked me where I go. When I first started, I was fresh out of teaching at the junior high school level, and I had actually seen firsthand with my kids what a lot of the issues were. As time went on, every year that we would begin a new season of Degrassi, my writers would go into the schools. And we would go into the schools and we would talk to the kids and we would talk to the teachers, find out what the issues were of the day. And we called this our blue sky session, and we would spend about a week or two just in big, broad research, finding out what it was that the kids were talking about and how they were talking about it. And it's really interesting because not only did we have to figure out what they were talking about, it was how they were talking. Because once we moved out of Generation X into the millennials, well, then we were starting to use computers and emails. And then, of course, when we move into Generation Z, we're on TikTok and there's Instagram, and there's just different ways of relating. So we had to be very mindful not just of the information that we were imparting, but being authentic to how the kids were exchanging information. So it's a matter of really trying to keep your finger on the pulse, and it's not just one person who does that. And the other way that my show was kept honest was I cast age appropriate. And so if you see a 15-year-old in my show, that's a 15-year-old actor who's playing it. And every time we had a new script, we would have a round table with the script, and my young cast would be there. They wouldn't have read the script before. My producers and directors would all be there, and we would read the story, and then we would have a really great discussion with these young people and with our craftspeople, and that was another way that helped keep the show really honest as well. So it was an ongoing effort because we were very aware that the moment we weren't authentic, that we would lose our audience.
Okay, who wants the pressure of asking the last question? That weighty moment when everyone turns to you and says, what is it you want to ask? Who wants to be that person? You want to be that person? Okay.
Another question, I mean, that's okay. So do you think that because you spent so much time focused on building community on your sets, that's why not only did people feel like they could be safe on your set, but you were getting these extremely authentic stories, which is probably why people can relate to so many of the characters, right? So do you think it's just because of the community, and were you thinking solely about community when you were building your show?
Well, you know what, that's a great question, because I not only built a show, but I built a business. And I've been an entrepreneur for 40 years. And it was very interesting because, you know, when the whole Harvey Weinstein Me Too movement broke out, I've been asked, you know, have I ever had to deal with incidents like that in my career? And I can say honestly, no. But that is because not only did I create a show, I also created a corporate culture that was my business. And it was very important to me that the business was run the same way that I expected my show to be perceived. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that we had a safe working environment for people, and a safe and a supportive working environment. And I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that what happens behind the scenes is also very important to how people feel safe, particularly when you're dealing with underage kids and you're dealing with very sensitive subject matter. You need a safe environment for that. And so we were very mindful that we were building a corporate culture at the same time that we were producing a television show.
Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the way our Innis events often work, we like to end with a thank you from a student. And I'll introduce a student and tell you why this particular student is doing the closing remarks. So I typically have principals' dinners in September, and I meet a lot of the first-year students. And one evening, I met this student, and she said, "Do you know what I'm wearing?" And I couldn't really tell. The shirt was kind of crumpled up. And she said, "It's a Degrassi t-shirt. And I'm at Innis because of Linda Schuyler." So I thought, okay, well, this is a person who needs to do the closing remarks. So I want to introduce you to Tiana Severiano. Did I butcher that? Or there you go. And she's going to close this out. And then I'll just have a couple of things to say about books, etc. Once she's done her thing. Take it away, Tiana.
Hi, my name's Tiana. I'm a Degrassi superfan, really. I'm a first-year student at Innis. I'm in film studies, and sometimes being a big Degrassi fan means I'm a very insufferable friend, because with every piece of advice I give you, I have a direct Degrassi episode to deal with the exact issue you are dealing with. And that's just because that Degrassi opens so much conversation. And I think what strikes me most about your story is you've been a writer, you've been a director, you've been an executive producer, but you've remained an educator through all of this. And not only were you a teacher in a classroom, but you welcomed the world into your classroom. And I greatly appreciate it, just on a personal note. And speaking of a personal note, I was talking on the phone about this opportunity with my Portuguese immigrant grandmother the other day. And I was asking her if she remembered Degrassi in its original air. And like many of these conversations with my grandmother, they're usually very short and vague, and I understand. It's very hard to remember times of hardship being a new Canadian. But to my surprise, she did remember Degrassi, and she even made a note of watching it, and my aunts and uncles watching it as well. And coming from her, this was a lot. For a lot of new Canadians, television is a tool. My grandma told me stories about learning English from Sesame Street, learning about Canadian culture through CBC and sports broadcasts. But to her, Degrassi was something new. It helped her to understand the world in which she was raising her teenagers, a world that she didn't understand herself. Oh. And that really means a lot to me. And as someone born in 2005, now more than ever, Degrassi is a tool and an index to navigate young life in the social media age. The topics which you deal with are dealt with such care that Degrassi helps even the most casual viewer become a master of empathy. And this empathy allows us to connect and educate others just like how you educate us. So thank you for coming with us on this journey and connecting with us and empowering us to make our own choices. So thank you, Linda.
Oh, thank you very much. It's lovely.
And thank you, Tiana. I have to say, we're never let down by our students when they come up and speak. Instead, we're just bowled over. So, two things. The first is Linda has books. She brought some books with her. She came with a big Santa sack and she just dumped them out on a table. So she's happy to sign them if you would like to buy them. And that will happen just outside. You may have seen the table, just outside the door there. And then the other thing is, and I'm going to probably need some assistance from those. Oh, before I do this, I have to thank a host of people. We have people up in the booth. I'm not sure who's up in the booth tonight, but they're there, and we can't do anything without them. You don't see them, but they make everything run. And but I have to give special thanks to Ben Westrate, who is our communications guru, and more than anyone else, Shayla Anderson, who is our events coordinator. Give her a round of applause. She works her height-challenged frame off to make these things work. I knew she'd appreciate that. Anyway, so the last thing is, and this is where I'll need Shayla and Ben's help perhaps, is our next event is the Harold Innis Lecture. It will feature journalist Robin Doolittle talking about access to information, and the moderator will be Hamal Damatal, who is this year a Massey Fellow. And I really encourage you to come back yourselves, but also let others know about this event. It's sure to be enlightening and engaging. And that will take place on the 26th of October. They were like, October. It's like, you can't be trusted to get anything right. So I want to thank you all for coming, but I especially want to thank our wonderful, wonderful guest, Linda Schuyler, for writing this book and for talking to us about it tonight. Thank you so much, Linda.